just brought dragons. What a horrible, horrible guy.
I went into that quietly and confident because I've lost to Richie 4 times at events.
Can't be 5 times in a row. Is Bretonnia the best army in the old world? And does the Green Knight need a nerf? Hello everybody, welcome back to the channel. It's Richie here from Dowie After Dark. I'm just back from the LGT, which is the London Grand Tournament, for those of you who don't know. And that was a absolutely massive event. Mainly was 40k players, so there was 840k players, there was 140 AOS players, and we managed to get 48 old world players. There was 60 originally, but unfortunately we had to have some dropouts. The rules pack was very similar to Rob's events, so if you've seen the TSN missions, it's very similar to that, apart from they used a different order, and they used slightly different missions in the game. So a couple of days before the event, there was a controversial FAQ about the Green Knight. Normally, the Green Knight can only come out of woods, or difficult or dangerous terrain that's deemed natural. So the ruling for natural terrain is anything that's difficult or dangerous. Now, hills are neither difficult or dangerous, but it was ruled at the event that the Green Knight could pop out of hills. So most armies that can't screen hills and woods are just going to have a Green Knight popping out of them anywhere. On most of the maps, there's a hill and a forest in deployments, so it does make it quite hard to screen out those Green Knights from just popping up behind you and just kind of ruining your day, ruining all of your plans that you're going to do into those knights coming at you, which really put the Bretonnian players in a really nice place. And you can see that in the standings as well. So before I go any further, I just want to say congratulations to the winners. So the winner of Best General, who won the event on tournament points and the most wins, was Dr. Luke Blacksill. Congratulations. The winner of Coolest Army was our very own Tom Carley, who runs UK Resin Prints. See down below if you want anything printed. And also the winner of Best Overall. So this is a combination of favourite game votes, Coolest Army, and tournament points. It is close orders, Ed Fawcett. He did absolutely amazing to win that as well. So congratulations to all of the winners. You guys absolutely smashed it. So I went into the event with this Drake Star list. Now, it's more of a kind of a funsy list for me. I just wanted to see what a full shooting army would do in this kind of meta, just using a big drilled unit of Iron Drakes to see what they can do. Now, I knew from playing this with a previous iteration of this list that it wasn't that strong, as I went 3-2 with it before in my last tournament. I made a couple of adjustments into that list, which would have made it a lot better into Bretonnians, which I knew there was going to be a lot of this event, so I kind of teched into playing against Bretonnians. So I had Banner of Hesitation on the big Iron Drake block, and the Fireball Thane in there as well to just try and shoot some pegs. I also, mainly because I've been shit-talking cannons for absolutely ages, I just thought I'd try them, see how they do, and see if I can change my mind from the Grudge Throwers. Now, I did okay at the event. I did manage to go 3-2, which was quite nice. I'm quite happy with that result, with that list, because I did get put into a couple of really hard counters for the list, as I really struggled to deal with high toughness monsters and multiple high toughness monsters as well. As the only list I lost into was Double Dragon and then triple T6 monsters in Tomb Kings. So I'm not going to go fully back to the drawing board. What I am going to do is take the list away and tech it slightly so I can try and face these monsters as well as facing into the Brett spam. Because I think once you've got a list that can deal with the toughness 6, toughness 7 and toughness 8 monsters, and as well as fighting against the Bretonnians, I think you're onto a real winner in this meta. Later on this week, I'm going to be doing a meta rundown video with what we saw at the LGT, with what people were running and the kind of tactics they used. So I won't talk about that much in this video, but I will do a brief rundown of how my tournament went. So if you saw my last video, you probably know exactly what my list is. For those of you who didn't watch my last video, it's probably worth you going back, watching that video, and then you can see exactly why I was taking and why I was going to be taking it. The first mission that we played was Breakpoint. This is a really interesting mission because once you get your opponent down to 25%, they just break and the game ends. It could be on turn 3, it could be on turn 7, 8, as there's no turn limit for this game. So it's whoever could kill the opponent first gets a 400 victory points boost and the game just stops. Now I got paired into Ed Fawcett with his Double Dragons. This is his first event with this list and I was really interested to see how he did with it. And it was a really, really fun game. Me and Ed have played each other at pretty much every event that we've been to together. So it's always a fun game against Ed. And for the last 4 times that we played, I've managed to beat Ed. So he said that he's never going to let someone beat him 5 times in a row. And he did turn it around and he did manage to beat me on that one. So I did lose my first game. So here's Ed's list. A Dark Elf Dreadlord with great weapon, full plate armor, shield, Sea Dragon Cloak, Black Dragon, and the Pendant of Kaleth. He also had a Supreme Sorceress, with hand weapon, level 4 wizard, Black Dragon, Tome of Furion, Talisman of Protection, 2 Focus Familiars, and Battle Magic. In his core, he had 8 Dark Riders with hand weapons, cavalry spears, repeater crossbows, light armor, shields, firing fleet, scout and musician. Next up, he has another unit, exactly the same. He has a third unit that doesn't have firing fleet or scouts. In special, he has 6 Cold War Knights with lances, full plate armor, dread knight, ruby ring of ruin, standard bearer with the banner of Ganeth. These are pretty hard to deal with because they've got a really nice save. Putting the ruby ring on them is a very interesting choice as well. Unfortunately, in our game, I didn't really get to see what they do because I shot them before he got to me. Next up, he's got 5 Dark Elf Shades with repeated crossbows and a veteran. Another 5 Dark Elf Shades, this time without the veteran. Another unit without the veteran, so that makes 3 units of the Dark Elf Shades. This was a really fun game. Unfortunately, in Breakpoint, it does have a setup that I don't particularly like doing because you can't just cast it in a corner. So I did go as far left in the deployment as I possibly could. So let's have a look and see why I chose to put the stuff where I did. Unfortunately, Ed is only a 2-drop with his list. So we started by putting down a unit of Dark Riders and then the Dragons in a building opposite where I was going to go. I castled in the corner as much as I possibly could. So I put the Iron Drakes in a wood with the unit of handgunners behind them, the Anvil holding my center, and then a unit of Rangers in a line to cover my extreme flank. The cannons were put behind so they could shoot over the large targets, as if I'd have just put them out in the open, any of the scouting infantry just would have been able to scout there and just absolutely destroy them. So I kind of had to cancel in the corner just to try and stop all of the scouts from getting around me and behind me. So in this deployment, I made sure that there was no 12-inch gap behind me and no 12-inch gap to the left of me. So any scouts that come in would either have to come in front of me or to the far right-hand side of me, thus meaning they could be inside a line of arc and I could definitely shoot at them. I tried to keep my anvil as center as possible so that if a sorcerer comes near me, then it's going to be within the 24-inch range, as most of his spells are under that to be able to cast, which means I'm going to be able to either spell break them or at least try to unbind them when he comes closer. So turn 1, nothing really happens. There's a bit of posturing. I do manage to kill 5 of the Dark Riders with my Fireball Flame, which is just chilling out behind my Rangers. And then turn 2 happens, and I get charged with a multi-charge from the Dragon and the Dark Riders into my Rangers. I do stand and shoot, but unfortunately I don't manage to do anything as I wanted to stand and shoot into the Dragon. How stand and shoot works in this edition is you don't take any minuses to shoot because they are considered to come into your close range, but unfortunately you do need to have line of sight to them. Only a certain amount of my models did have line of sight into the Dragon. What Ed was trying to do here is to split my attacks. So I couldn't put all of my attacks into the Dragon with my great weapons on the Rangers. So it was a nice clever move to put the Rangers into that extreme flank to at least take off a couple of attacks from the Dragon. So as you can probably tell, the Dragon and the Dark Riders absolutely smashed into my unit of Rangers and managed to mulch them. They were pretty much taken out in one turn. I did manage to kill 2 of the Dark Riders, so there was 1 left. With an overrun move, that single Dark Rider went off the board, and the Dragon managed to pass his leadership test and then angled to face into my army. With that, I then proceeded into my turn to try and shoot away some Dark Riders with the Fireball Flame that was now left out in the open. He had passed his leadership test for the unit that had died next to him, so his job now was just to kill all of the Dark Riders and all of the skirmishers on the extreme right flank. The Dragon then decided to charge into the Anvil of Doom. This meant that my Iron Drakes really needed to start getting up the board towards the enemy sorcerer, as my cannonballs had just been shooting into it and managed to strip off a couple of wounds, so I'd sent out the Drakes to go deal with the sorcerer. Unfortunately, I'd taken quite a lot of damage from Ed shooting, which, considering it's strength 3 with no AP and only getting AP 1 on 6s, was actually quite surprising. I just couldn't make any of my saves. I shot a barrage into the sorcerer and managed to do a few wounds to it, but unfortunately not enough to bring it down. It wasn't looking too good for the Dowie at this point, and I had positioned my handgunners at the back so that if the Dragon overran, at least they will be able to get some attacks into him as he come in. But unfortunately, as the Dragon overran, and then in his turn he managed to kill the Thunderers, that was my break point, and unfortunately the game ended. I do think if I had a couple more turns, I might have been able to bring the points back by killing at least the sorcerer if he hadn't have run away. But unfortunately, with how the game works on breakpoint, that was the end of the game, and I did lose, unfortunately. It was quite a close game on points, but Ed did finally manage to smash me. Really fun game. Always loved playing against Ed. And Ed actually managed to win best overall at the event, so I do not feel bad about losing him at all. Congratulations, Ed. It was a great game.
Right, so I am joined here by Ed from Close Order, who just absolutely savaged me in the first game. Unfortunately, I couldn't roll any ward saves and I couldn't kill any dragons, so we were playing Breakpoint and he broke me, unfortunately. How'd you find the game?
It was good. You were broken, I got the points. That was the winning strategy there.
Yeah, pretty much. I mean, I went into that quietly unconfident because of 2 dragons. I just couldn't get him, and he just managed to break me. Good game, really fun game. But yeah, he's brought dragons. What a horrible, horrible guy.
I went into that quietly and confident because I've lost to Richie 4 times in events.
Can't be 5 times in a row.
As I always say, nobody beats me 5 times in events in a row.
Yeah,
so,
that's true.
Yeah.
Right, thank you very much for the game, mate. It was brilliant.
Pleasure.
My next game was Flank Attack against Nav Hussein. Now, this was a really interesting game because I thought that this one would have been probably one of my best deployments, with the hill in my deployment zone, and then I could just stretch out and make a really nice line with the thin pink line that he's going to have to run into and just take all of that fire damage. And I thought this was going to be a really easy game against the Tomb Kings. With all the flaming damage, I thought I was going to get through and manage to do loads of wounds to him, and then with the flammable, make stuff just pop. But unfortunately, it didn't work that way at all. Nav's list is a Tomb King with a hand weapon, heavy armor, shield, Cymrian War Sphinx, Talisman of Protection, Sword of Might, Armor of Aegis, a High Priest, hand weapon, level 4 wizard, on foot, arcane familiar with elementalism and necromancy. In his core, he had 29 skeleton archers with hand weapons, warbows, light armor, master of arrows as a champion, standard bearer and musician. 3 skeleton chariots with cavalry spears, warbows, master charioteer, standard bearer and musician. Another 3 chariots, but this time with the obsidian lodestone. A tomb scorpion, another tomb scorpion, then a third tomb scorpion. Then he had 5 necropolis knights with cavalry spears, light armor and shields. Then finally in the rare, he had 2 necrosphinxes. So going into this game, he had 3 monsters that were toughness 6. Now I'm wounding them on 5s with my iron drakes, and I'm wounding them on 2s with my cannons. So I was quite confident going in that I managed to just shoot them on the way in. Unfortunately, it didn't work. So I set up with my cannons on the hill so they could shoot over everything, with my anvil in the center, so that I could buff all of my units if I started to push out, or if you come close to me, I could then stop some magic. So my rangers were in a nice thin line on the side. I didn't want to go too thin this time because it's a diagonal map. If I then fell back in good order, I could potentially fall off the board. So I condensed them down slightly, and then on the right flank, I was held by the Thunderers, and in the extreme center, that was held by the Iron Drakes. I hadn't found out into line hand with them because my plan was just to shoot at the large targets, which meant that all of the unit could hit anyway. Going into this, there was a sea of Tomb Kings coming at me. So he started with his Tomb King in the center, with a Necrosphinx and Tomb Scorpions on each flanks, the chariots on the flanks as well, and then the skeletons with the wizard holding the center. Nothing really happened in turn 1, it was just me posturing, managed to get in a couple of cannon shots off. I did manage to do 3 wounds to the War Sphinx in turn 1. In turn 2, he managed to hit my lines, unfortunately, with the War Sphinx and the Necrosphinx, which I just hadn't managed to do any wounds to. My rolling had been so poor. Unfortunately, I just couldn't do anything to them. I'd also left a minute gap on the right-hand flank of my Iron Drakes, so the Necrosphinx managed to come round and get a flank charge. I had thought that I had managed to cover it, but unfortunately I might have just knocked it, so he managed to get that in, which was a bit of a shame because I couldn't get any standard shoots with them. But I did move my BSB in the unit up to the corner so that he could try and do some damage into the Necrosphinx. Unfortunately, the Rangers in this position are probably screwed. There was a light volley of arrows coming in, but it didn't really manage to do much damage to anything that he had line of sight to. The Thunderers managed to shoot at the chariots. They did manage to kill one, even though that most of the unit couldn't see, and they had some minuses to hit on them. By turn 3, stuff had started to get really, really bad. In my turn, all I'd managed to do was win combat against the Necrosphinx. Unfortunately, I didn't win by much, so it just pulled back slightly. I did reform my Iron Drake so that I could shoot into it, but unfortunately did absolutely nothing to it. My inability to roll 5s and 6s with them did probably cost me this game, unfortunately. The Necrosphinx, the King, and the Chariots on my extreme left flank was absolutely munching that unit of Rangers. Unfortunately, everything on the left-hand flank had started to crumble, with nothing that could go over and give it support until I'd killed that Necrosphinx on my far right flank. This was looking bad for the Dowie. Unfortunately, the Rangers died in my turn. That also left his Necrosphinx on my right-hand flank, then opened a charge into the Anvil, along with the other Necrosphinx and the King, which they made really, really short work of. A Tomb Scorpion then ran in and killed one of my cannons, with my Gun Thane just chilling about trying to kill them. He did manage to pop one of the other Tomb Scorpions, but by then it was a little bit too late. My Iron Drakes had turned around, get some pot shots off to try and kill the King. Unfortunately, I didn't roll any 5s or any 6s again to wound, and just didn't do anything to it. Sat there with 4 wounds remaining, just kind of laughing at me. The Knights charged into the flank of my unit. I did manage to beat the Knights in combat, which then meant I could reform, but by then it was too little, too late. Unfortunately, I didn't have much left at all, and we ended the game there when I only had the Iron Drakes and my BSB and the Gun Thane left. That had been a really, really tough game. Unfortunately, my dice just weren't with me. That did show me that I need to have more durable support units, and I can't just rely on the fact that my Iron Drakes are going to kill stuff, because if I just don't roll well in a game, that's the game over. That was a really, really tough game. I just couldn't do anything to the toughness 6. The cannons did absolutely nothing with their AP2, so I definitely do prefer Grudge Throwers in that respect. It was still a decent game, but I just don't think I did anything to him. I just managed to kill a Tomb Scorpion and a unit of Chariots, which is absolutely crazy, because normally going into Tomb Kings, they have a really hard time dealing with this kind of list. It was really interesting to see when it went really well for the Tomb Kings and they just managed to decimate my lines. Next up, I played into the Wood Elves. This mission that we're playing is Command and Conquer, where the center, there is a impassable bit of terrain. If you hold it at the end of the game, you get 200 victory points. In this game, I played against Scott Seckold. This was a really, really fun game. He was a great guy, considering he was playing those dastardly Wood Elves, but it was a really, really fun game. In his army, he had a Glade Lord with light armor, Forest Dragon, Ogre Blade, Talisman of Protection, a Befuddlement of Mischiefs, and Anoint Netlings. That just means it's a Forest Dragon that's really, really hard to hit in combat. He then has a Spell Weaver, Level 4 Wizard, Elven Steed, Oaken Stave, Ruby Ring of Ruin, and Battle Magic. And then a Waystalker with Arcane Bodkins. 5 Glade Guard with Azrai Longbows, Arcane Bodkins, 7 Glade Riders with Cavalry Spears, Azrai Longbows, Arcane Bodkins, and Reserve Move. Then 5 Glade Guard with Azrai Longbows, Arcane Bodkins, 8 Deepwood Scouts with Azrai Longbows and Arcane Bodkins, 8 more Deepwood Scouts with Azrai Longbows and Arcane Bodkins, 6 Wild Riders with Hunting Spears, Light Armor, Shields, Wild Hunter, Standard Bearer with the Banner of the Hunting King, and a Musician. Then another 8 Deepwood Scouts with Azrai Longbows and Arcane Bodkins. But this time, these in special. In rare slot, he had a Great Eagle and 9 Way Watchers with Azrai Longbows, Arcane Bodkins, Veteran, and a Sentinel. This was a really interesting list, and I knew that he was just going to outdrop me and just position his scouts everywhere to try and shoot me where I couldn't get line of sight to them, and then just kind of run out last turn, do a little bit of damage, and just try and pit me for points. So I needed to play super, super aggressively. And Wood Elves are quite a hard match for us, so I knew that if I just managed to kill the dragon and maybe 1 or 2 units, I might be able to clinch a win. With this game, I castled in one of the corners on a hill, just so I could block off 12 inches around me from behind, so he couldn't just pop out scouts behind me. Then I had the Iron Drakes in a big line, just to try and maximize shots, just in case any of the scouts popped up in front of me. Then I had the Iron Drakes in a big old line, just to try and maximize any shots that come at me. On my right flank, I had the Anvil and the Fireball Thane. The Fireball Thane was there to try and deal with anything that's got any minuses to hit, that's going to pop up on my right-hand flank. So I had gone far left to try and bait him to come on my right flank, and then the Fireball Thane and the Anvil can shoot into him with non-BS shooting. I then went extremely aggressively with my Rangers, popping them 12 inches away from his units at the back of the board. This was so if he tried to evade from any of my shooting, they would just fall off the board, and I would have killed them without even having to shoot, so that would have been really nice. He decided to play super defensively and just put all of his shots into the Rangers every single turn to try and whittle them down to try and get the points off me. The Way Watchers and some archers decided to come down my right flank, where I'd placed the cannon as a bit of a sacrificial unit, so to try and force him to come near that, so I could then try and get some shots off with my Fireball Thane. I then decided to run the Iron Drakes up the board and then clap the Anvil and get them to run again. So the Drakes had moved up the board 12 inches to try and get some shots off at the dragon the next turn, or even try and get up into that wood and deal with that unit of Glade Riders that had the Wizard in there. Unfortunately, I forgot to take any more pictures of this game. The dragon did end up charging into the Iron Drakes, and I did manage to kill the dragon, killing his general and holding the central objective. Did manage to get all those extra VPs, so that turned it into just a narrow victory. It was a really fun game, and it was a hard-fought win against the Wood Elves. So just like that, the first day had ended, and it had been a brutal, brutal day. 2 losses, 1 win, and unfortunately, I hadn't played into anything that I wanted to play in yet. I hadn't played into the Bretonnians. I'd really tacked my list into playing against them and murdering those Peg Knights. I just hadn't played them. But luckily, the draws went up, and I managed to play against Tom Gould with his Bretonnians in game 4. It was an amazing game. He's a great guy, and we just had a blast. While I blasted off his Pegasus, he did manage to do a bit of damage to me, but I managed to shoot him off in the end. Yes, for Grimnir. In Tom's list, he was running the Exiles. So in his character slots, he had the Baron with Lance, Heavy Armor, Shield, Royal Pegasus, the Lucky Heirloom, and the Virtue of Heroism. He then has a Baron with Royal Pegasus, Frontier Axe, Falcon Horde of Fredmund, Gauntlet of the Duel, and Virtue of Knightly Temper. Unfortunately, that Falcon Horn isn't going to be doing much against me, as it turns off fly. He then has the dreaded Green Knight with the Dolorous Blade, Heavy Armor, Shielding, and Barding. Then he has a Paladin with a Lance, Heavy Armor, Battle Standard Bearer, Banner of the Lady's Grace on a Barded Pegasus. In his core, he has 8 Mounted Knights of the Realm, hand weapons, lances, shields, heavy armor, first knight, and a standard bearer. Then he has 8 mounted knights of the realm with lances, shields, heavy armor, first knight, and a standard bearer, followed by 19 peasant bowmen with longbows, no armor, and skirmishers. These were to just cover flanks and to provide -1s to hit to his Pegasus if he gets in amongst them. He then, in the special, has 5 Pegasus Knights with lances, shields, heavy armor, first knight, standard bearer, the banner of the Zealous Knight. Another 3 Pegasus with lances, shields, heavy armor, first knight, and standard bearer. So this was a really fun game. I really enjoyed this. This was definitely one of my funnest games at the event. It was just a blast, very backwards and forwards, and he's just a great guy. In this game, we played the mission where you have to hold a unit and one of the flanks, and you can't tell your opponent which flank you're going to put that unit into, and then it's kind of a surprise during the deployment. You can put 25% of your army in there or just one unit, and we both just decided to just do one unit and just kind of leave it there. It doesn't really change much this mission. It's basically just an open battle where you just have to put something in one of the flanks, so it's not too bad. I decided to go with the cannon on the far flank, and he decided to go for some peasant bowmen on the extreme other flank. I then put all of my rangers around the wood so that he couldn't pop out with the Green Knight. I placed my anvil on the hill and the Iron Drakes on the hill as well. This was kind of a bait to see if the Green Knight would charge into either of them, because if he charged into that unit, I would then challenge out with my BSB, and my static combat res should be able to just pop him in one turn. The anvil as well is pretty hard to deal with by the Green Knight, so kind of leaving that open was kind of tempting him to come over this side. Unfortunately, he didn't fall for the bait and he didn't pop him out of that side all game, which was a little bit of a shame. What that did leave me open to do was to move up the board and start shooting some knights. He had positioned all of his peg knights hidden behind buildings with his characters, so I couldn't hit them with cannons or any of my long range shooting. But in turn 1, I did manage to kill a couple of knights, and one of my cannonballs did actually manage to kill 2 Pegasus Knights turn 1, as there had been a little bit of an opening that I'd created by running my Thunderers up the board. Luckily, he hadn't put any of his knights in the lance formation, as getting hit in the front with a cannonball would have really hurt. It was a pretty cagey turn. I didn't move my rangers at all, and they just took some pot shots off at the archers to try and thin their ranks slightly. Unfortunately, with all of the -1s to hit and only half of the unit being able to shoot, it was quite difficult to try and kill any. I did put the Rune of Oath and Steel onto the Rangers. I anticipated a charge from the Pegasus the turn after, as they had just come up behind the board, behind the peasants. Now, this unit's pretty scary. It's got all the heroes in it, and I just did not want to get charged by this. So when they popped out into the open, I was going to have to deal as much damage as possible. In Tom's turn, he just jumped straight forward. Now, he had placed some of the Pegasus behind some of the archers, which creates a cover for the Pegasus, unfortunately. So any shooting going into them is going to be at -1. He had done this on purpose, and it's a really cool tactic. He knew that I couldn't move any of my rangers to get into a better shot because the Green Knight could just pop out. Also, having Ponderous and not having move and shoot. Also, crossbows, when they move, are -3 to hit. So it's just not good. So I just kind of had to stay there and then weather it if they charged into me. I needed to do as much damage with the Iron Drakes this turn as possible going into those Pegasus, or they would easily be able to wipe my Rangers in one go. He had bolted the Knights forward because next turn they were going to try and charge into the Iron Drakes to stop them from dealing any damage to the Pegasus, and then the Pegasus can run a full mock through my army and start killing me. On the extreme right flank, some Knights and some Pegasus were flying down the flank to try and kill my Thunderers and the cannon, to swing round and decimate that flank. In my next turn, I had reformed my Thunderers into a big line so that when he charged into me, I would get A, more shots, and B, more attacks into the combat. I had also wheeled my Iron Drakes up as close as they could to try and get into line of arc into the Pegasus to be able to do some shooting. I had then fired my Thane into the Knights that were in front of the Iron Drakes to try and minimise the charge, and had managed to kill a couple of them. Unfortunately, I didn't manage to kill any of the Knights on the far right flank. But the Iron Drakes, with the shots that they managed to get in range and in arc, did manage to kill quite a few of the Pegasus, even with the -1 to hit. Burlock being in the unit meant they're only going to be at -1 from the cover saves, so they were still hitting on 4s, which was pretty good. So I did manage to get quite a few wounds into those Pegasus, and unfortunately no wounds onto the heroes yet. So going into turn 3, there was a really scary charge that was about to happen. The Pegasus and the heroes were about to charge into the Rangers. Unfortunately, there was absolutely nothing I could do about it. I had to sit there and wait for the indomitable Dowie to get carved down. In the name of Grimnir, he declared a charge on my far right flank with the big unit of Knights into the Thunderers, but he didn't decide to charge with the little unit into the Iron Drakes. Instead, he decided to try and save their points and get them out of dodge. So the Green Knight also popped out of the hill and charged into my Thunderers with those Knights. He managed to kill a couple of them, but unfortunately, I managed to put so many attacks into the Knights, I managed to win combat against the Green Knight and those Knights. The great weapons really did damage against those knights on that far flank. Unfortunately, the rangers did not fare so well. As they were in skirmish and not in a big line, I could only get a certain amount of attacks in, and unfortunately, as he charged into me, he managed to kill over 10 of my rangers, so no one could fight him back, and I broke and ran from combat. I did manage to roll really far on my roll. He only managed to roll a 4 for his pursue, so suddenly his characters and the Pegasus were stuck in the woods, and he didn't manage to catch me. So I don't think it felt good that he couldn't catch some dwarves, but it felt really nice that those dwarves could live to fight another day and conserve their points. In my next turn, I'd managed to rally with my rangers, and the Iron Drakes had brought their guns to bear into the unit. With a thunderous salvo, I'd managed to kill the other 2 heroes in the unit, and just leaving the general left on 2 wounds. At this point, Tom's right flank had started to crumble under the weight of the firepower, so Tom decided he needed to try and get some points to try and claw back victory out of the hands of defeat. So he decided to charge my anvil. The Green Knight once again charged into the Thunderers, and I managed to win combat again. His Baron, hitting into my anvil, managed to take me down to only 2 wounds remaining. My Iron Drakes walked up, ready to get on the hill to shoot at him if he managed to get off the board and then come back on in the next turn. The last thing that happened in this game was my Iron Drakes managing to kill the Baron, the Green Knights succumbing to shots from the Fireball Thane, and unfortunately, those rascal Pegasus killing my last cannon. It was a really close game, a really fun one, but we managed to destroy those exiles. So I was starting to feel slightly better about the list. There were downsides to it, but definitely it worked really well into Bretonnians. So next we go into lunch. So this is when the painting competition happened. I'll now show you some of the armies that were in best painted. I did enter mine in, but there are some super stunning armies here. Let me know what you think about them down below. For my final game, I got paired into Tomb Kings again. Now, I was slightly worried because it did not go well into the first Tomb Kings army. I had to try and change my game plan a little bit. Luckily, there wasn't as many T6 monsters in this list, and also Jacob was a really, really nice guy. Now, I'll run you through his list. He had a High Priest, level 4, Necromancy, Power Scroll, Lore Familiar, a Mortuary Priest with Skeletal Steed, Wizard level 2, Illusion, Ruby Ring of Ruin, a Royal Herald with Light Armor, Battle Standard Bearer, Flail, Amulet of the Serpent, a Tomb King on a Dragon with Heavy Armor, Breath of Desiccation, Full Plate Armor, Wicked Claws, Biting Blades, Armor of Aegis, and Talisman of Protection. He had 39 Skeleton Archers with Warbows and a Standard Bearer. He then had 5 Skeleton Horse Archers with Skeletal Steeds and Warbows. Then he had 36 Skeleton Warriors in a phalanx with shields, thrusting spears, Standard Bearer, and then also a unit of 20 Tomb Guard with light armor, shield, and halberd, with a Tomb Captain and a Standard Bearer with the War Banner. In his special, he had 2 Tomb Scorpions with ambushes to pop up. Then in his rare, he had a Necrosphinx to come in and do some damage. For this game, we ended up playing Open Battle, and it is Open Battle A. It's my favourite map to play with the Dwarves, as you can build a nice defensive bunker. Now, coming up against this army, it was a sea of bone. And it's quite an imposing sight when it's coming up against you when you've got quite a small army. So he did decide to just charge straight at me as quickly as skeletally possible. Unfortunately, I didn't manage to get any pictures of turn 1 because we were just chatting, and it was the 5th game of the tournament, so we just kind of been chatting and laughing away. But he did charge into the Iron Drakes with the 2 toughness 6 monsters. I did manage to win combat by quite a bit. He did manage to kill quite a few of the Iron Drakes, but I did manage to kill the Necrosphinx. Unfortunately, I didn't do that much damage to the Tomb King, so he was still alive, as I was locked in a challenge with him with my BSB. The Rangers on my far right flank had turned around to shoot into the Tomb Scorpion. They had managed to kill the Tomb Scorpion. My Fireball Thane had jumped into the Handgunners, and then he shot down and killed the other Tomb Scorpion that had popped up behind me. So luckily, I'd managed to neutralize all of the threats that were behind me, so then I could focus on the trouble in hand, which was the big blocks coming at me and the dragon. In my next turn, my cannons were trying to take small pot shots up at the dragon, but unfortunately just didn't manage to do anything, with having to re-roll all of the wounds from the Armors of Aegis. That is absolutely amazing against dwarves, and it's really difficult to try and wound them. When you're wounding with Drake guns on 5s and 6s and then having to re-roll your wounds, it's just really, really difficult to try and make any of those wounds stick. The cannons as well, for some reason, wounding on a 2, I would always reroll into a 1, and I just couldn't do the final wound to the Tomb King. It was really, really difficult. I think on retrospect, I probably just should have charged into him and tried to win on combat res, but I was scared of losing my BSB as he'd managed to take 3 wounds off him in the last turn, so I was slightly scared about that. Unfortunately, I forgot to take any more pictures of the game because we were just having a brilliant laugh and just mainly chatting. In the next turn, his dragon did unfortunately die, which then meant that the Tomb Guard were just going to get shot at by the Iron Drake, so I managed to kill most of them. He then did a Hail Mary charge with the archers into the Iron Drakes, and I actually managed to win combat by about 20, which then crumbled the rest of the unit. So unfortunately, the game kind of ended there for him. It was a really, really fun game, and I would love to play him again in the future. We both had kind of a bit of good luck and a bit of bad luck. Keeping the dragon alive for a couple of turns really kept the game going, but in the end, I did manage to win. There was a couple of failed charges from the dragon into the units behind, which if he'd have made them off, would have completely changed the game. But overall, over those 5 games, I had some really, really fun games. If you haven't been down to any of the UKTC events, the games are really fun, and I would suggest if you do want to go to tournaments, please go to them. The people you play against are majority absolutely lovely. I was really happy to meet all the other Dwarf players down there as well, some absolutely great guys, and I'm glad that you guys did so well in the event as well. I'm going to be making a video about the adjustments I'm going to make to my list in the future, as coming away from this event, I need to be able to deal with toughness 6 more. I think I need less guns and a little bit more static combat res. So I've got an idea and I'll keep you posted. Take care, guys. Goodbye.